Revolution Radio. You're listening to Revolution Radio, where it's 53 degrees, and I've got Joe Anunnaki on the phone. Hey, Joe, what would you like to hear?
We are observing your Earth.
I'm sorry, Joe, but we can't.
And we'd like to make
sorry, Joe, but
contact with you.
Collision course.
It is essential for our survival to use these powerful tools in the most humane and wise way. And the only way to guarantee that is not to shuffle the responsibility off to somebody else, but to make sure that every citizen understands science and technology to some extent.
Lighten up, Francis.
Good evening, everyone. It's Francis, your friendly amateur astronomer. It's Friday night, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time in New York City. This is episode 42 of Collision Course, and I thank you for being here. If you know me, you know that right now I'm talking to you and it's not Friday night. It's Thursday evening, 5:14 p.m. Central Daylight Time, because I'm recording this interview with astronomer Rob McNaught. Rob's over at the Siding Spring Observatory in Australia, and he's granted me a wonderful opportunity to interview him, and I thank you very much, Rob. How are you, Rob? And you were going to tell me something about Rob.
Yes, indeed. I was always called Robert until I got a job working with another Robert McNaught. He'd always been called Bob, so to differentiate myself from Robert Bob, I became Robert Rob. Anyway, so
I'll tell you, Rob, my name is Francis Damian Walsh, and I had a pickle of a time when I was younger with the name Francis. But I've grown in, being an adult. It's different when an adult, uses the name Francis than they were younger. It must have been odd for you to have to get used to that a little bit too, though. But that's kind of odd that you found someone with the same name.
Well, it was partially not coincidence because I was going to be working at a remote place, which at the time was in southern England. Then later out at Siding Spring, I was asked if anyone I knew would be interested in the job. Anyone that got on with me. And I knew Bob McNaught, and I knew he'd recently graduated and wasn't working, so I specifically asked him, probably because of an absurd sense of humour. But anyway.
Okay, I'm getting up most of my information now. I've done a good amount of research on you. Now that's another funny thing by having someone on my show that I don't know personally. I'm left to do a lot of research from what's available online and what I have available to me through my friends, and it must be interesting. Or I wonder what it's like to know that somebody's trying to bone up on their research. I'm sorry about that, about you in particular. Now, you are at the Siding Spring Observatory, and you take part in the Siding Spring survey, yes?
That's right, yes.
And that is part in partnership with the Catalina Sky Survey, the CSS.
Indeed, it's other than the telescope itself, it's their CCD. And other hardware, and it's all their software.
And now, simply put, or I hate to put things simply, but sometimes it's the best way to put it, the Siding Spring Survey is responsible for surveying or scanning the sky, taking images, reviewing the images, and then returning the results if there is something unexplained or previously unobserved or observed, to correlate observed. I mean, you are taking pictures with your telescopes to scan the skies and find new objects, yes?
That's right, yes, indeed.
And
asteroids and comets in the first instance, but there's another project piggybacking on ours, and that's the Caltech Real-Time Survey, At one time, asteroids were called the vermin of the skies because the astrophysicists taking photographs of galaxies would find trails of asteroids ruining their photographs. Nowadays, with the asteroid surveys, basically the whole sky is being plastered every month, and the survey images taken specifically to find asteroids are now being used by astrophysicists to find transient sources like supernovae, cataclysmic variables, flare stars, and still surprisingly, there's occasional Myra variable that gets up to 14th magnitude that's still being picked up that was previously unknown to be variable.
I found my list of questions that I created just for this interview, and I'm going to ask a couple of them, and at the same time, I'm surely going to think up some along the way. So if you would, can you describe a day in the life of Rob McNaught, a day that involves being at the observatory? If you would, shortly, maybe try to give our listeners a feel of what it's like to be an astronomer that goes to work as an astronomer doing something like this.
Okay. It's become very much a routine now, so I have there's very little setup time. Normally, I'll start observe. In fact, open up the dome in the mid-twilight. Because our pixels are quite large, 1.8 arcsecond pixels. I noticed early on that opening up the dome and immediately taking an image shows essentially no deterioration in the image quality through heating the dome. So I don't feel any need to open up the dome, like half an hour earlier. So pretty much I can be observing within about 5 minutes of actually arriving on site, actually taking productive images. So I'll turn up in the early evening, check email, new discoveries, the Near Earth Object Confirmation page run by the Minor Planet Center. It lists all recent discoveries or potential new Near Earth asteroids and comets. I'll check to see which ones of those are worth observing. The bulk of them tend to be followed up by amateur astronomers unless they're extremely faint. So it's often best for surveys to keep on surveying rather than spend a lot of time following up discoveries. But certainly, just in the initial phase of discovery, it's always advisable for the discovery site to do their own follow-up for at least the first hour or two. Amateurs tend to take over from then. Any other specific objects that might be worth following up? For example, an object that's going to be passing particularly close to the Earth will often be observed by the JPL radar group, either using the Goldstone or Arecibo radio telescopes in a radar mode, actually, transmitting a fine beam towards the asteroid, and some seconds later picking up the return signal. They require accurate orbits to be able to pinpoint their radar beam. So if there's anything like that that's required, I'll often list it for observation during the night so the observation helps improve the orbit. But other than that, it's really just taking survey images, a block of sky, just plaster it with images, but 4 for each field with adjoining fields, and each image is about 15 minutes apart. So between the first and the fourth image to be about 45 minutes. And basically the software does the rest. It finds all the objects within the image. It then correlates the image over each image over the 4 frames, ignoring anything that's not moved. Or at least our software ignores anything that's not moved. The Catalina Real-Time Transient Survey looks at those images for changes in brightness from over the course of the 4 images and with past images. But anything that is orphaned on each frame, the software looks for sort of 4 orphaned images that appear to show a uniform motion over the 4 frames, or any subset of 3 within those 4, and presents them to the observer as possible real objects. And many of them are identified by the software as known asteroids because their position corresponds to the known position of known asteroids. But everything else, new objects or maybe just noise detections, are presented to the observer to make that final decision about whether or not they're real. And if they're real, report them to the Minor Planet Center. Or if they're real and unusual, report them immediately to the Minor Planet Center. Otherwise, they just run-of-the-mill, occasional observations of main belt asteroids will be sent in bulk at the end of the night. So that's basically it. It's really just pressing buttons.
Well, that's a great visual, though. For me personally, through some of the things that I'm doing myself, that's wonderful. That's sort of the same experience that I'm going through at times when I'm doing, I don't nearly do it as much. I don't have as much time devoted to it as you are, but when I am operating telescopes, that's kind of on the same type of thing that I want to be doing. I have probably created 3 questions as you were answering them. Question 1 would be, now you're dealing with CCD cameras, and you said it was 1.7 arc second per pixel?
Yeah, 1.8 arc seconds per pixel, and it's a 4x4K CCD, single chip.
See, that'd be so something...
2 degrees by 2 degrees.
For the listeners, that'd be an image that I'm definitely probably not used to. I've had an opportunity to use the telescopes of the itelescope.net network. I've had great experiences with those. That experience for me is what makes the connection to some of the things that you're doing professionally in the SSS Sighting Spring survey. And as an amateur astronomer who's really... I'm taking in so much astronomy right now, more than, a lot. And I'm loving every second of it. And I love to find these connections of some of the things that I'm doing and how it connects me to the things that I'm going to be talking about with a guest like yourself. Now, I have a question. You must obviously get the image right away at your location, but then are you responsible for forwarding it yourself, or does it get collected automatically for another resource?
If you're referring to the Catalina Real-Time Transient Survey, there's a computer in the office that automatically works on the images, so it's going on all the time in the background. But it's not particularly remote observing. I'm it'll be about 5 to 10 meters from the telescope, sitting in the office. Right. So it's just a fiber optic link between the telescope and the computers in the office.
I have a strange question from one astronomer to another. Do you sleep during the day and work at night?
Pretty much. I tend to find when I'm observing, I lose probably about maybe 3 hours sleep a night, and after several nights that accumulates such that I do tend to sleep somewhat longer. But
I think that puts a personal side, I think, a little bit on astronomy, so that the listeners get a sense of, being devoted to this science and being responsible for some of it, like you are, to keep this watch at that time on that continued basis. You do have to. You're going to be sleeping during the day and doing your work at night. The most obvious question, and I think the question that actually came up first on my list, because I'm so interested in it, and I'm going to follow this up with a couple other ones. Can you tell me about the experience of naming an object you have found? So let me see if I can rephrase that. You kind of explained the process, though. So let me add this: you do your astrometry, you find the coordinates, you take follow-up images, and then you submit it yourself to the IAU?
Indeed, although just the routine stuff goes automatically at the end of the night, but for new discoveries or specific follow-up, it is an active click of the button by myself. To name an object, well, so it's only asteroids that you can name. Comets are named for the discoverers by a committee that oversees any independent claims for discovery.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So you can't name a comet. You can only have a comet named if you are seen as being the discoverer of it. For asteroids, the naming process is always significantly delayed because you require the asteroids to have been seen some years apart. For a main belt asteroid, it will require several orbits to have a precise enough orbit to predict its future position. And once the orbit is accurately known and it's travelled around it several times, then it gets a permanent number, and once it's permanently numbered, the person adjudged to have been the initial discoverer of the asteroid then gets to name it. And the rules have changed a bit over the years. Nowadays, because of the vast number of asteroids that are being discovered, they've had to develop an automated algorithm that decides which observation is considered to be the discovery observation, and it's often not the one that first draws attention to the object. An example would be a recently found a trans-Neptunian object, 2012. Oh dear, DR30. I've actually forgotten its designation.
It's DA14.
No, that's
no, it's not
one. No, it's something. I think it's DR30.
Okay.
It's a trans-Neptunian object, quite large, probably a couple of 100 kilometers or so, and it's certainly. I'm pretty sure its closest point to the Earth is around Neptune's orbit. I think it comes inside. Inside the. This is terrible. I really can't remember the details, but it's the only trans-Neptunian object I've ever found. But following it up over the course of a couple of weeks, I then went back through just ran its orbit through the image archive and found I had images taken in January, and I found the object in the January images, which gave it approximately a 2-month observed arc, and from that, which clearly showed it was a very high eccentricity, not quite parabolic, but it's a very long orbital period. From that, the Minor Planet Center then identified quite a number of just individual observations, but more to the point, they found 3 nights worth of observations by Spacewatch a few years ago. And because they were all linked at the time and given a designation, I believe that's going to become the official discovery of this object, although it wasn't recognised at the time that it was that unusual. So although our current knowledge that this object exists was based on a discovery I made a couple of weeks ago, ultimately I won't get the formal discovery credit, and I won't get to name it. So it can be a bit convoluted, but you have to have automated rules now, because if every asteroid had to have a committee deciding which was the discovery claimant, there'd be a lot of people who would spend all their time doing only that.
That puts a whole new color layer into my understanding, and that's why I love talking to new people about astronomy, just so that, because I come into the naming, finding objects from a very unexperienced position, which I feel is okay. It actually, talking to my listeners and going through this process, it works for me. And as I go along through it, I'll learn more and more. But that totally adds a new color to it. And what it does for me, listeners, is it's telling me that if you're going to have naming an object in your goals as an astronomer, you're going to have to put in the years of effort. It's not just happily bumping into an unknown object, you put your name on it, and then there it goes. Because, I whimsically might have thought that at one time, Rob, so you're solving all my problems.
Okay. A few years ago, there was a little bit of a crisis of faith amongst amateur astronomers, because for years they'd made very significant contributions to specifically follow-up and occasionally discovery. But because large surveys, particularly now Pan-STARRS and the Mount Lemmon survey, and some of the other ones are getting down below 20th magnitude, there really aren't many opportunities now for amateurs. I mean, certainly some amateurs do have access to big telescopes and can go faint. But even if they do make a discovery these days, they'll often find that their discovery will be, formally lost to observations that maybe weren't linked at all to any single object. They were just orphaned observations one night. There's a moving object at these positions, not linked with anything else on any other night. And once they do get linked, often they'll become the discovery observations. So amateurs actually going out with discovering asteroids as a goal, that's very much dropped off, and most amateurs that are involved these days are very much doing it as a sort of a service activity in supporting the larger surveys.
Well, I'll tell you for our experience here, me and my father-in-law built an observatory here in Texas called Cosmic Obsession, and we started it in August, and we just had our first light on February 25th. My father-in-law's goal, which is the best goal of all, is to take the CCD video images from our telescopes and broadcast them live online and make from our telescope available for people who are interested in astronomy and maybe not have a chance to see for themselves. They can come online and see live broadcasts. I find that avenue of access to, amateur astronomers quite exciting. And my father-in-law is the reason why we built the observatory was for the same reason you were talking about, the ease of use of the Uppsala telescope, because you're able to go to the observatory, open your shutter, and probably begin to be shooting right away. When we were using our telescopes in a mobile setup, before we had the permanent pier pipe in our observatory, it would take us 2.5 to 3 hours to set up, align stars, calibrate stars, polar align the mount to just get going. So I recognize that it's nice to have an observatory, isn't it, Rob?
Oh, it's wonderful, yes. I mean, I should add that there's been obviously a lot of work gone in by a lot of people prior to me just rocking up at the telescope, opening the dome and pressing a few buttons. I mean, like the software is pretty slick. That was all written at University of Arizona by the Catalina folks. And obviously the telescope itself is a good quality. You've got to have good alignment. The Arizona folks put a new large array worm and gear on the telescope to make the tracking very good. There's no guiding done at all. You can get a 2 minute exposure with minimal trailing. But 30-second exposure will get down to below 20th magnitude in good seeing, although Cyclone is not renowned for good seeing like Hawaii or Chile. But having good equipment and an expensive CCD, it has to be added, it does make life very easy.
Let me ask you a question. Do you have an average exposure time? Is there a standard? Is there a standard operating procedure for the survey images?
It changes slightly depending on how much sky is available and what sort of what discoveries have recently been made. Actually, I'm not quite sure where I'm going there. Years ago, I used to do 20-second exposures. There's been a slight change in the software that makes 20-second exposures not quite so efficient. So I'm now doing 13, 40-second exposures. And I have been pushed a little bit further into the southern sky because Pan-STARRS and other northern surveys, some of the Catalina telescopes, Catalina Mount Lemmon, they tend to cover most of the equatorial skies. So with more of the equatorial skies being covered, and this being the Uppsala being the smallest survey telescope currently in operation, and there's no point in competing by looking at regions that they've already looked at in the previous couple of weeks or so. So I tend to go into the deep south, and there's actually a bit less sky available to me now than previously there was. So I tend to do longer exposures now than I used to. But yeah, so 30 and 40 seconds. If the seeing's bad, tend to do longer exposures. If the seeing's really bad, tend not to observe.
I want to ask you a question. I have a pretty large network on Facebook, and I asked them to ask me to ask you a question. So I have one or two here. Let me ask this one. Do you know what the definitive composition of a comet is, Rob McNaught?
No, I really don't know anything about the physical processes.
And that's fine.
I press buttons. I've got really little idea about anything else.
That's fine. Let me move to another question. I kind of suspected that because, astronomy is broken into, different fields, and for observational astronomers, and because I don't know if there's a title for the type of astronomy you're doing, Rob, so I'm sorry, but I'm taking for yourself, we're using telescopes, we're taking images, we're observing what the images tell us, comparing them to existing star charts and picking out the anomalies. At the same time, you are confirming existing data, new discovery. And then when you said that there might be an object that's close by that needs to be tracked, you're going to put that on your image list for the night, and you'll go and help them confirm orbits through that information.
Yes. Sorry, did I miss a question there? But no, that's correct.
Honestly, you probably didn't, because sometimes that's how it comes out of me. Sometimes it'll sound like it was a question, and then it doesn't turn out to be a question. Please forgive me. I have a question about opinions on objects. Can I try that? Do you have an opinion on some of the objects we've been told about recently, like Apophis and 2011 AG5? I mean.
I have an opinion in the process. That technically should have been our discovery. I don't know what the Minor Planet Center were doing, but that should have been our discovery. It went to Kitt Peak based on 2 nights of observations of what was clearly an unusual object, and it was observed under difficult circumstances by the Kitt Peak observers. At low elongation, sort of quite close to the sun, and they picked it up while they were observing another object. But their initial positions on it, on this object, whatever it was, were quite poor and over 2 consecutive nights. And basically, any orbit could have gone. They were exotic orbits, but anything from going directly into the sun, or being a Mars-crossing asteroid, not actually an NEO. They were essentially much the same. Once Gordon Garrett discovered the asteroid from the Siding Spring survey about 5 months later, and with immediate follow-up over the next few hours and over the next day, the orbit was so secure that within a few pixels of where the Kitt Peak observations had been made, the orbit was good enough to predict where their positions were, and the linkage was made. There's no question at all that the significant event in the discovery of Apophis was Gordon's detection of it several months later. But anyway, they've come up with a very nice name for the asteroids. I mean, I've got thoughts on about this, but no, I don't really have any concern about impacts. A possible impact would have to be, larger than one in many hundreds before I'd really have any concerns at all. If that's what you're getting at.
Well, sort of, because when what would you say, the public media, is introducing this information to the public, it's not just me. I'm not the first one to announce it, because there's been some recent interest with another object that I like to touch on it and ask opinions so that we get a better understanding. But what I'm seeing now, and I'm going to ask you, is there's future work to be done with this asteroid as it's going through its phases and the years go by. I'm sure the Upsala telescope will be taking images of it again, correct?
As I say, it's one of the smallest survey telescopes to do follow-up astrometry, particularly on impactors. You tend to be when they're relatively faint. When they're close by, sure, I'll take images and do the best I can. But the real thing is get an orbit good enough for the radar folks to bounce radar off them. And once you get good distances and velocities based on radar, the accuracy of orbits increases dramatically. So you can make future predictions much more reliably by the radar folks being able to bounce radar off them.
I'm going to ask one more question about Apophis. It sounds like there's a little bit of sarcasm maybe at the establishment, at the way that they handle naming objects. Would that be fair to say from that?
Oh well, it was just mistakenly done in the first instance.
Right.
Well, anyway, I'll let it pass its time, and I regret it now. But anyway, I regret it now because I'm looking for funding, and I can't honestly say that I discovered it. I've got to go into a convoluted. Well, no, the survey. It was Gordon that found it. If you're looking for funding and you want to say that Apophis was our most significant discovery, and somebody checks and say, well, you didn't discover it. Well, it was the significant event in the discovery of Apophis. It's not the formal. We don't have the formal discovery credit, and even with some astronomers, they just don't buy it. It's Kit got the discovery, therefore they obviously did the important work. And if you're trying to approach funding bodies, and you don't really have a great deal in your resume, they notice.
Well, I'm sorry that I had to bring up that. I didn't recognize that was print, and then that's unfortunate. Well, let me see if I can move off to something else. I have a friend named Alex in Germany, and he has what's known as Vectorscope, and I guess he runs this service. And what Alex and Vectorscope does is they track NEOs, NEAs that have close approaches to each other. And he alerts people who receive that information, and astronomers who use it can, help confirm. The question coming out is, have you ever had interactions with like two asteroids in the same image field, in the same field of view? Do you see asteroids interacting with each other, known asteroids interacting with each other, and then moving in a different course as being an important area to research, or they'll get refound again? Because I'm trying to equate, because Alex, he puts a lot of heart into his information, and I get this sense that I need to be following it, but I haven't yet to be able to make an observation using the data that he's given me. And I wanted to ask another astronomer, is it important for maybe someone like me to be looking for collisions amongst asteroids out in space?
Okay, no, I'm aware of Alex and Vectorscope, and it's a very interesting project. For someone to actually go out and try and look for them themselves is essentially pointless. Alex has to use a vast amount of computer time to find these close approaches, and it's by using computers that you find asteroids being very, gravitationally very close to each other. If you just take images and two asteroids are side by side, the probability is they're a vast distance from each other, and being such small objects, the gravitational effect they're having on each other is minuscule. Now, obviously, every mass is having a gravitational effect on every other mass. At some level, it will be having an effect, but the thing is, it's not a detectable level with our equipment. When asteroids pass extremely close to each other, they will deflect each other, and that's certainly been a technique used in the past to determine masses of asteroids. The orbits of two objects prior to a close encounter, assuming that it's a close encounter that is quite rare, so that the previous orbit that's been calculated for the two asteroids it's truly independent of the other. After they've had a close encounter, the deflection of each asteroid on the other, obviously the larger asteroid will deflect less than the smaller asteroid. It can be detectable through time as the orbits change. So from that close approach, particularly if it's a close encounter that's quite prolonged in time, so the asteroids they're not at significant slant angles to each other and just speed past. The period of weeks or months in which they're quite close to each other will have a detectable effect on their future orbit. So by noticing the changes in the years to come after the close encounter, you can estimate the relative mass of the two asteroids based on these changes. So I mean, it's an interesting project, and certainly in the past that was a technique used. Small asteroids passing close to some of the bigger asteroids to determine their masses.
Thank you. I have a question. Filters. Filtered light. Do you use a certain filter or more than one filter when you're taking survey images?
No, we use no filters at all to maximize the lights in each pixel. The quality of the Uppsala telescope is very good, and being mirrors, we don't have the chromatic aberration. So no, we use no filters.
The CCD camera on the telescope, it's an imager, and it's not. The reason why I'm asking this, the CCD cameras that we use for Cosmic Obsession Observatory are CCD video cameras, so they're putting out a live video feed. Is your camera an imager, or is it a video taker, or both?
It's just an imager.
Yeah. So
it's as I mentioned earlier, it's a single chip. It's not a mosaic, so it's a single 4x4K. So 16 megapixel chip, and I can't remember the pixel size now, because I don't normally look at any of these details, so it's probably many months since. And
it's probably okay. It's okay because
they're quite large pixels. So physically, it's a large chip. I'm holding my fingers together to estimate its size, because again I can't remember what size it is. It's something. Certainly several centimeters square. But another aspect that's a little bit different is it can be read out by multiple amplifiers. So there's currently it's a 2-channel readout. So one half is read out by one amplifier and the other half by another, and then they're combined later. So that halves the readout time. It can actually be read out as 4 channels. But you often find you get crosstalk between each channel, so you get artifacts introduced into the image, and by reading out 4, the artifacts just get a little bit complicated, so we tend to just read out 2. And overall, between ending one image and starting the next, which includes slowing the telescope to an adjacent field, there's about a 12-second delay.
What typically is 1 minute?
It runs at minus 100 degrees Celsius.
Right. Question about the telescope. I'm wondering, I know that it's a Schmidt telescope, and forgive me for not knowing, because honestly, I'm not going to pretend that I know everything I need to know about telescopes, and the reason why I'm asking. Yours is a Schmidt telescope. The telescope I'm using at Cosmic Obsession Observatory is a Schmidt Cassegrain. Is there something important inside the telescope that you're using? Is it a reflector or refractor?
It's a reflector, yes. It's a Schmidt telescope, which tend to be used for wide field applications. It was actually built at the Uppsala Observatory in Sweden in the 1950s, and it was designed specifically to be operated from Mount Stromlo in Canberra, which is quite a bit south of Siding Spring. But during the 1970s, as the city of Canberra developed and there was significant sky pollution, they relocated the Uppsala Schmidt up to Siding Spring. The latitude is much the same. Well, it's several degrees different, but the same mount was used at Siding Spring. Optically, very nice telescope. There's very sharp images. You could certainly get away with a CCD with smaller pixels, but no, it's a nice classical Schmidt. It's actually been slightly modified with normally. It was designed for photography, so you'd have photographic plates placed into the centre of the tube. But with a classical Schmidt, you can't have an eyepiece sticking out the side. You have to have a detector inside the tube. But to make it easier for access, the Catalina guys put a 45-degree flat mirror into the tube to send the focus out to one of the edges, and the CCD is actually mounted on the side of the telescope tube. Oh, I was going to say. All the cabling is then outside the tube, which includes the cooling cable, so you don't get moisture condensing inside the tube.
So they have a flat secondary mirror that's pointing at the CCD camera, and that makes it so the camera can be all contained on the outside.
That's right, yeah.
That's pretty interesting. And I think that's an interesting point about telescopes for the listeners, are those secondary mirrors. And I know that our Schmidt Cassegrain is an aplanatic, and the type of secondary mirror affects the type of imaging that you can take. Now, when I think Rob said that he uses a clear and a no filter, so it would be clear, and you said white field images. So let me ask, is that something like grayscale reversed?
Oh, sorry, wide, W-I-D-E.
Oh, okay. A
wide field, yeah.
A wide field telescope. Yeah. Now I get it.
When you're trying to sort of cover as much of the sky as possible, then optics just allow you to take very wide field. Oh, now one thing I should point out about Schmidt telescopes that people might be wondering about is a classical Schmidt has a curved focal plane. So when photographs are taken, you put the photographic plate or film in and tension it into a curved surface that approximates the curved focal plane of the Schmidt. Now, obviously, you can't do that with a CCD camera, so we also have a flat field lens that converts the curved focal plane of the Schmidt into a flat plane, which is then focused onto the CCD.
That's probably not how it came originally back in the 50s, huh?
No, it was all photographic. I used the Uppsala telescope a lot when it was in its photographic days in the 1980s and 1990s. I used it a lot then, but because it was photographic, it sort of fell out of favour as the CCD era developed. And basically the Swedes had stopped coming out to use it, and students were losing interest in projects involving photography. Right. So it sort of fell into disuse until Steve Larson at the University of Arizona came up with funding to have it converted into a nice CCD survey telescope.
I guess that's a good. This would be a good time to ask this question. These projects are they funded or not funded by? I mean, are they? This observatory isn't under government control, but it's more an educational outlet that gets funded by educational resources or scientific funding and grants, right? It's not a government-controlled operation.
Up until last October, the Siding Spring survey was totally funded by grants from NASA to the University of Arizona. They were operating 3 telescopes, the 0.7-meter Catalina Schmidt, the 1.5-meter Mount Lemmon reflector, and the Upsalis Schmidt at Siding Spring. Now, Mount Lemmon and Catalina are in the Santa Catalina Mountains just north of Tucson, and the third telescope here at Siding Spring, they all ran the same hardware and the same software. It was a good value project because it could all be run from the central hub in Tucson. With the exchange rates becoming dramatically worse in the last couple of years by some tens of percent, the cost of the Siding Spring operation, and bearing in mind it's the smallest survey telescope, they just escalated out of sight, and for that reason the Arizona stopped funding an expensive small telescope. Currently I'm getting some sort of discretionary funds from the Australian National University, but the project falls between funding holes and funding guidelines. It's not research, it's essentially just you call it stamp collecting almost. It's and just inventing the solar system, finding out what objects are there, and you could call it defence. It's not. It might be planetary defence, but you won't find any. You won't find many countries that will seriously consider funding such projects out of defence. And the USA does. The linear telescopes and some other projects in the past have been, partly funded by defence or even wholly funded by defence, because they sort of piggyback on other operations like deep space satellite surveillance, which is essentially using similar technologies and software. But certainly Australia never considered that. There was a project run by Duncan Steele in Australia back in the 1990s, and we came up against this issue of just how projects are funded, and nobody would put up their hand to say it would be funded by them. It fell through all the cracks. Duncan and some of his staff at the time were doing research, so we could get initially a research grant, but in the end it stopped getting funded because it didn't seem to fit any funding category. So that's the situation I'm in now, trying to get funding. Unless there's a direct funding by government, then the project folds in a few months.
Wow, that's terrible. I'm just going to go right out and say it. One of the questions was here, and I'll say it, and you pretty much answer it. Will the SSS survey extend into the future and be run forever, in your opinion? And I just heard your opinion that it's questionable. You know what? I hope, because I have this, for myself personally, I have this view about what's going on in amateur astronomy, and I see everything moving forward at great speeds. More people are getting involved, and more, and now I speak with you, and I have this, now I have strange feelings because, I surely hope that all your friends and yourself and your hard work is rewarded in the right way so that it continues. And let me say this for the listeners, and hopefully for you, if there's any good news, know that there are probably, there are a lot of people out there talking about astronomy. There's a lot of people out there that feel it's important. I know that you're on a totally different level than I am, but hopefully by communicating with me, somebody might listen and share and find out that there needs to be help. And I surely hope that you get that, Rob. Surely, that's terrible news for me, for me to hear.
I mean, It's always nice to be employed, to have an income, to do something you truly love doing. But the Siding Spring survey is always going to have a use-by date. It's a small telescope. The discovery rate, it has dropped slightly, although 2 years ago we had a hiccup that I can't really explain, but we had a much lower discovery rate 2 years ago than last year. So, last year we were almost back up to where we were, despite very bad weather.
Rob, I have to take a break. We're gonna do a 3-minute break. I'm sorry, sir, that I had to interrupt you, but we're gonna go to break, and we're just going to hold our conversation for 3 minutes. Okay?
Okay, I'll hold my breath.
Don't do that. Welcome back, everyone, to Collision Course. It's Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time in New York City. You've been listening to me, your favorite amateur astronomer, talking to my new good friend, Rob McNaught from Australia. The Siding Spring survey, one of 2 astronomers on site taking part in that. I welcome you back to listening to the second hour of that show. I heard before I started that intro, a question almost started from Australia. Were you going to ask me something?
I'm sorry. It's wherever it was, it's gone. Although I will pick up on one point regarding 2 people. When the funding stopped from the NASA grant to Arizona last October, I got discretionary funds, but Gordon didn't. So there's only one person currently doing it.
More bad news, Rob. More bad. Well, listen. It may seem bad news, but in my life, I've had occasions for bad news to present itself, and for it to turn out in the end a lot different. And it's easy for me to say that, and I don't want to sound like I'm patronizing in that anyway. But I always like to have a positive outlook. I really do, and I hope that you have a positive outlook, because I know you're working hard, and surely your work is going to be rewarded, because now you've been taking part in this research, being an astronomer, being the guy who's been with an eye out in the sky while others haven't for. Tell me how long, because I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to say too much, and I don't want to say too little. Is it over 30 years?
Well, I started off doing a satellite tracking job, which was actually for geophysics of the shape of the Earth and the Earth's upper atmosphere based on changes in satellite orbits. I did that from 1990 to 96. So if you include that, then it's just over 20 years.
You were doing...
that doesn't sound right.
Satellite...
sorry, 1980. I started in 1980, I beg your pardon. Started in 1980 to...
32 years.
To 1990. Oh, so I must have done 10 years in the satellite tracking. And then 6 years with Duncan Steele's asteroid program, which was officially the acronym is called ANEAS, AANEAS, which was piggybacking on the UK Schmidt telescope, which is the southern equivalent of the Palomar-Schmidt, which did the National Geographic Palomar Sky Survey. The UK Schmidt did the Southern Sky Survey. European Southern Observatory also had a Schmidt, which contributed to the Southern Sky Survey, but the bulk of that was done by the UK Schmidt. And Duncan's idea was to simply scan the plates that they were taking anyway. They had found a small number of near-Earth asteroids and comets prior to Duncan's program, but we dramatically increased the numbers. And being back in the early 1990s, there were still a number of very large asteroids, several kilometers across, to be discovered, and we discovered quite a number during that project. But basically, in the end, when there was a change of government, politicians said, why is this project being funded from such a strange source? Because there were no direct funding sources it was applicable to be funded from. So we lost our funding and a change of government.
See, and that's political correctness, not very politically correct. And I think you said the word piggyback a couple of times. And for the listeners, you get a sense because I've thought on occasion, we'll go out and maybe try to find a little grant to help our observatory or a proposal or a little money on the side. And when you start dealing on larger scale government agencies, our politicians are taking a very good a research project and putting it on a bill that has nothing to do with it, and then when the government change, the new government looks at the bill and says, oh, why is this here? I need to get more votes, so they end up unfunding it. And that's probably pretty much unbeknownst to the astronomers who rely on that funding to continue their research. Let me ask you a question. I am fortunate enough to be speaking to you because of my friend and your friend, Pete Polos. And Pete is connected with the iTelescope.net network of telescopes, which are public access telescopes for a fee. And they make this great network of telescopes available to the public. What's your general opinion about that? That's a fabulous thing, right? I mean, I guess that's a silly question, but
oh no, it's absolutely wonderful. I've used several of the iTelescope telescopes in Spain and New Mexico, and it'll be wonderful when they get their network of telescopes running here at Siding Spring. But as I said earlier, amateurs tend to be the people that are keeping tabs on the new discoveries, which frees up time for the surveys to keep discovering new objects. I've had a few occasions recently when I've found an object and I've followed it up with the iTelescope network. Also, some asteroids passing close to the Earth that required just a final update to the orbit to allow the radar folks to pinpoint them, because they don't attempt their radar bouncing unless they know there's a reasonable chance they might hit it, because it's obviously an expensive project. And I've used the iTelescopes to observe these close approach asteroids to help the radar folks observe. So it's absolutely fantastic, and the more the better.
Yeah, I've been, just fortunate to use them through the process. When I first started using them, the first time I used one of them was back just last year in June, and I was looking for the comet Olenin, and I found it, no worries. But I wasn't doing astrometry. I was learning. I didn't even know about astrometry at that point. I finally took some images and submitted some astrometry for the Eros 433 Parallax project, that Transit of Venus website. It was a reenactment of the 1931 Parallax project on the asteroid 433 Eros, and I was with and through the other members that were taking part in that recreation, which was actually taking part in the new parallax measurements. I was introduced to the software and astrometry.net that allowed me, without knowing too much except how to operate my computer well, how to be able to perform astrometry on the images from iTelescope.net. So, I mean, that resource for me took me from not having tools to having tools that would take me years to work my way through. So for the listeners, if you haven't been over to that website, iTelescope.net, and you're really interested in taking pictures when you want to take of space, go over there, interact with people like Pete, and the support you get from there, because that's just great. And I hope Pete's in the room over there with you, and he can hear me say how much I really, really, really appreciate him. Because I think it's important when you meet somebody that's done really added to your knowledge and your ability to get more done, you thank them. So that's why I'm doing it, Pete. Listen, let me ask you, because yours isn't the only observatory there. Now, you have one of the research domes there on site, right?
Indeed, it's the Uppsala telescope is now owned by the Australian National University. Originally, it was Uppsala University in Sweden, but it's now officially owned by the Australian National University. It's getting pretty old now. It's a 60-year-old telescope. The optics are fine. Mechanically, it's fine, largely due to the upgrade by the University of Arizona. But unfortunately, the dome's not fine, which is also a bit of the issue. It requires probably tens of thousands of dollars to be spent to properly upgrade the dome. Water leakage has damaged some of the wooden struts within the dome. There's how many telescopes? Actually, Pete's sitting beside me here. How many telescopes of that size?
Well, there was
something like 13 or so.
Oh, really? There's that many?
And it's increasing. And obviously, once the iTelescope shed gets built and they start, shoveling telescopes into it, it's going to increase dramatically after that.
Right. Whenever I get to see images, I only get to see images like the ones that Pete take, and you don't get to see all the domes and all the installations from one image. And I haven't gone to Google and tried to look at it from above. I should probably do that to get a better feel of it. But I was just trying to get a feel of the whole environment there. But there's much more than one. And so let me go back to the university, the Australian National University. Are you affiliated with the college? Are you able to?
I'm employed by them as an observer.
Okay. Will that continue if the funding for the SSS doesn't continue? I mean,
no. I mean, there may be other opportunities, but not to do with asteroids.
Well, I'm sure. I'm not sure, but I really hope I'm just here. I'm befuddled and bemixed because, I hate to, when you talk to your friends or your new friends especially, you first hope that everything's in tip-top shape, everything's tip-top order, and then as you get to hear what's going on with them, you have to adapt to what's going on. So I feel a mix of emotion as I'm talking to you because I know for one, surely how important it is to you, and then two, to the community at large, because I spend so much time. And the reason why I do it, I tell myself I'm doing this to, keep others informed. I don't make a paycheck from doing the interviews or doing the radio. I just really, really love doing what I'm doing right now. So surely, someone's going to step up to the plate and find or create the proposal that that has the perfect solution in it, and hopefully it'll come from a totally unknown source, and a totally unknown commercial source may step in and find out that it's see the value as valuable as it is. Now, how long has the telescope been in that dome? It's been there since 2003?
No, it's been since it was brought up from Canberra in the early 80s. I think it was fully installed by 1982 on this site at Siding Spring.
And as I'm listening to it, my brain's turning to figure out, trying to make the connections. Who could use the dome? It's almost like, well, all I can do is just, and by you coming and talking to me, I really, really appreciate it. And it's spreading the news of what's going on there. And for me personally, the experience of talking to experienced astronomers, is priceless for me. I don't have an education in astronomy, and people ask me that all the time. But I like to say that the things that I'm experiencing is almost better than a college education, as long as I stay committed, as long as I'm, actively searching out new knowledge, which I do. We spent last year just building our private observatory, and it was all consuming. I put us on a pressure schedule at the end, which that became all consuming as well. You find yourself after those endeavors with all the results, the observatory and the night sky, and the next thing I had to do with myself was figure out what to do next. And so, actually, after we had for our first light here, I almost went into an adrenaline void. I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what to do with myself because you get into construction so much. I was totally in a void. I didn't know what to do. But now, I get a better feeling. Having this conversation with you has changed my opinion a little bit about, finding and naming things, though it's pretty straightforward, and it's probably something that I should have understood before. But the way I'm learning about astronomy, I find out the information directly from another astronomer, and then I immediately put it in its perspective, and I say to myself, well, Francis, if you plan on finding something, plan on taking the next 10, 12, 15 years to do it, and take your time. Don't rush into it, because nothing's going to happen fast. And,
well, there are other things like finding novae or supernovae. So comets are certainly much more immediate. They tend to be given a name by the naming committee within a week of discovery. It's very rare that a comet isn't named very quickly. There's usually some other issue like competing claims that might hold a comet being named, but no, comets are named very quickly. And you get credit for discovery of supernovae, quite rapidly. That gets usually published once it's spectroscopically confirmed as a supernova, which might only take a few days.
Let me ask you something that I have no idea, but I really would like to know. As an amateur, which way should I be thinking if I want to try to develop a survey that will do me, an amateur, some good? I mean, is it what's the process of creating a survey? Well, I don't even know if I'm asking that question right. I understand that. Yeah, my perspective tends to be very much from the United Kingdom, because when I was a very active amateur in my teens and early 20s, I was heavily involved with a magazine called The Astronomer, which tried to organise amateurs to do work of professional interest, things that professional astronomers would like amateurs to contribute to. And in terms of surveying, discovery of novae, supernovae, comets and asteroids, particularly Guy Hurst, who edited the magazine, he's still going and doing it from both the magazine and the British Astronomical Association. He'd speak to a lot of professional astronomers to find out, what is it you'd like amateurs to contribute to? What form do you want the data in? And he'd do all the liaising, and he'd organise amateurs to do a number of surveys, which is how I first became interested in doing astrometry. Guy Hurst and it's terrible, I've forgotten his name. Peter, if you listen to this, I apologise. Peter Birch. I've forgotten this. That's terrible. Anyway, they got me started in doing astrometry of asteroids and comets. Their novae and supernovae surveys, they encouraged amateurs to choose certain galaxies and observe them as often as possible. But nowadays with automated telescopes, you can have a list of thousands of galaxies and systematically work your way through them looking for supernovae. But you really have to have someone guide you as to what professionals are wanting. Not everyone can talk directly to professionals, but if you have a body that can liaise between professionals and amateurs and point out the significant objects to work on and exactly what to measure, you can make a significant contribution. And particularly supernovae discoveries is of great interest. Like the recent Nobel Prize to a number of astronomers for the acceleration of the universe based on observations of, well, in this case, extremely faint supernovae. But the whole process of discovering supernovae and measuring the distances is all part of what became this year's Nobel Prize in physics. You said Mr. Hurst was still active?
Guy Hurst, yes, as far as I know, is still actively canvassing the opinions of professionals and encouraging amateurs to get involved in such programs. Yeah.
That's great, because that's some of the information that I'll be able to take away from this conversation and take to the next step, because I would like to. We have this brand new observatory. to begin to utilize one or both of the telescopes in a type of survey, and I've never, I've just started to now, consider what it's going to take and how to do it. And even I would like to maybe begin to use some of the eye telescopes for a survey, because those telescopes are actually set up better to do a survey like this with their imaging than our telescopes here at home, because our CCD cameras are, they can be used. You can get still shots from them. But, I find the FITS files that come from the eye telescope CCD cameras to be quite invaluable for an amateur astronomer, because an amateur astronomer can go take a photo and instantly begin to be plate solving, doing astrometry, what have you, where the pictures that we get from our observatory right now, more designed toward live broadcasting the night sky than taking images of a survey. But I do plan on in the future to be taking part. I always want to take part in some sort of research that's going on, just like the Parallax project with Eros, which taught me so much. I know that the more projects I try to become involved with, your knowledge base just increases dramatically. So thank you for Guy Hurst's name, because I'll look that up, and he'll hopefully, through his information, give me some direction. And that's very, very great. For the listeners, I want you to know that, Rob has been gracious enough to spend this time with us today. So again, Rob, thank you very much.
Not a problem.
This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask you a question. I have my little dog Bella, a Ruff here in the background. She wants to get out of the room. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to be right back. Okay? Now the question is, and it's going to be simple. It's only going to take me to run to the door and come back to let the dog out. But I know that she's gonna bark. Here's a question from Facebook, and this I'm going to ask you another question after this, because it's probably going to be yes or no. Do you give any credence to the redshift measurements from telescopes and its description of travel of the other objects in our universe?
I'm not an astrophysicist.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't have any astronomy qualifications at all.
The questions these questions are actually some of the most popular questions among some of the amateur astronomers. They want to know about redshift. They want to try to understand some of the information in a different way than is being told to them. So a lot of questions will be like that, but that's okay. I totally understand. Here's going to be one that's good. Which of all the things you have found in space has surprised you the most?
Surprised me the most.
Either in finding it, it's life after finding it, or something to that effect. There must be something that sticks out, surprising, out of your observations.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, Pete's prompting me here. Yeah, probably the bright comet 2006 P1. At the time of its discovery, it really was quite insignificant, and it appeared it might not survive perihelion. It might not survive its passage around the sun, because it got relatively close to the sun, but it did, and it became a significant comet in the end, very obvious to the naked eye. So I suppose that was unusual, and even seeing it in daylight using the Finder telescope on the Uppsala, mounted on the side of the Uppsala telescope. That was surprising, seeing it very close to the sun in daylight. I gather, actually, I'm not sure anyone did see it with the naked eye in daylight. Oh, actually, I did. I've always wanted to see a comet from a commercial flight, and I specifically took a flight to look at this comet in daylight. I saw it in binoculars, flying from Sydney to Hong Kong. With the sun in the sky. But on the flight back, when the latitude was of the comet was much lower south, so just flying into Sydney, I was able to see the comet with the naked eye. The sun technically above the horizon, but behind the thick cloud bank, and it was a very obvious naked eye object. So yeah, I suppose that comet would be the unusual thing. Actually, I had something else in the back of my mind. when I started using the UK Schmidt plates and looking for old observations of newly discovered objects, there were a number of objects I searched for and found relatively shortly after their discovery, from images taken some years earlier, probably the image of Comet Hale-Bopp, which I think it had been observed for about between 1 and 2 weeks. It was moving, it was quite far away when Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp made the discovery, as the comet passed close to I believe it was a globular cluster. And, they were looking at the globular cluster and saw this fuzzy blob nearby. Because it was moving so slowly, the orbit really was quite unreliable, but I extrapolated it back and looked at the UK Schmidt plates. These are 6 by 6 degree photographic plates of the southern sky. And there was a plate taken a couple of years earlier that, or maybe more than that, I can't quite remember the dates. But I searched around and, there was this little fuzzy blob, very faint, slightly trailed in the correct direction. But interestingly, I had scanned that plate at the time, and in my notes for that plate I'd written comet ? Now, there's nothing about that object that would have drawn it to my attention unless I thought it was a galaxy. And at the time, every galaxy I came across, I checked to see if there were supernovae in it. And it was a relatively dense star field. It couldn't have been too far out in the Milky Way, I guess. And it's quite possible that I checked the comet image thinking it was a galaxy to see if there were any supernovae nearby, only to discover there was no galaxy. And I know for sure that has happened to me in a couple of occasions. So it's possible that I found Comet Hale-Bopp 2 years before Alan Hale and Thomas Bopp, only to subsequently ignore it. But it's something I'll never know because I don't have enough details written down for that plate. I've just got this enigmatic note, comet ? But yeah, finding it at all, possibly that was something that was very surprising.
Well, thank you for that answer. I'll tell you that we've been talking for a while, and I'm sure that I'm probably boring you. So I know also. I know also that we were brought together a little bit early. I was going to have a couple of friends join us during this conversation. I actually did pull in one of my friends, Will Young, who's president of one of a local regional astronomical club. Will, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Say hello to Mr. Rob McNaught.
Hello, Mr. McNaught. How are you?
Oh, good day. Pleased to meet you. Are you the Bill that used to, or maybe still does, a lot of asteroid surveying?
Unfortunately, no. I wish I did.
Oh, okay.
No. I have a modest setup as far as astronomy goes. I don't have a motor drive or a nice camera or anything like that. I use a 12-inch light bridge and an iPhone. So.
Okay, very nice.
But, what's important is that he's involved with even more people, amateur astronomers, than I am. And he was very excited to hear that I was going to get to interview you. I've been lucky enough to be able to speak with some astronomers and scientists, and I always like to get some of my friends involved because they have some of their own questions that I will never think of. And so, Will, I know that I brought you on late. I'm sorry. I'm glad I was able to get you in here. We ended up starting the interview earlier than expected. But I'm going to let you ask Rob some questions.
Fantastic. Well, it's an honor to talk to you. I've obviously been a fan of your comments for quite a while. I just didn't really know it, which is kind of interesting. But a couple of questions I had, like while I was talking to Francis about this show, was typically when you're looking for these objects, specifically comets, what magnitude do you deal with when they're really, really far away? I guess when you first start looking at the plates to discover them. And the second part of that question is how far, what's the furthest you've ever discovered one in in astronomical units?
Oh, now, answering the last bit first in distance, I think the furthest I've ever discovered a comet would be about 9 astronomical units, so about Saturn's distance. I can't remember the exact numbers, but yeah, it's of that order. Obviously, most comets at that distance would probably tend not to have much of a coma, so no doubt a number of asteroids have been imaged by the telescope at that distance, but not identifiable as comets. But
okay.
Yeah, to notice them, you've got to notice something unusual about them, and at that distance, they'd have to be unusually fuzzy to be noticed. So there's a definite bias against discovering distant comets.
What magnitude would they be?
Oh yeah, and the magnitude. Typically, because comets are diffuse, the integrated magnitude spread over quite a number of pixels, and they tend to be in the 18s at discovery. I'm not sure if I've ever found the comet in the solar radiation pressure will and the effect of the solar wind, the magnetic field. There has to be some backward extension of any gas or dust emitted from a comet. So yeah, if it's got a coma, it's got some form of a tail. In terms of being able to actually image the tail, obviously if it's a very distant object, the tail's going to be pointing directly away from your observing viewpoint, and the Earth which is close to the Sun relative to the comet. It can often be difficult to detect a tail. For a comet that has just passed around the Sun, Comet Lovejoy is an absolutely fabulous example of a tail disconnection. The tail, as it was developing, as the comet almost grazed the Sun's photosphere, it became disconnected as the comet just whizzed round the Sun and almost came back out from the same direction it went in at.
Welcome back, everyone, to Collision Course. This is Francis, your friendly amateur astronomer, and you've been listening to me interview astronomer Rob McNaught for a little over an hour, and then I brought my good friend in, Will Young. You know him. Hi, Will.
Hello.
And we also have in Kevin, Galactic Eyes, CV Observatory. He can't speak to us, but he can hear me talking to him right now. So I want to welcome Kevin. Say hello. I'm so glad that you're here. And I told Rob that I was going to ask your question. And Rob, Kevin's question was, I just had to scroll up a little bit. Kevin Bloodworth asked, Rob, how does someone who wants to get involved in finding comets or asteroids, how would they go about it? I'll leave it like that. How would an amateur go about getting into looking for comets and asteroids?
Good day, Kevin. Well, something you've really got to start out slowly. Quite often you'll get people with very little experience saying they've discovered a comet, and it turns out to be an internal reflection in their telescope, a known galaxy, even just an asteroid. The important thing is to know your equipment, to know what sort of artifacts it produces, and to actually observe a number of comets, both faint and bright, know what they look like, know how they move. Once you're confident that you know what comets are like, then the way to discover them is to take images and regions of sky that you have the largest possibility of finding them in. And even visually, I mean, David Levy made a visual discovery quite recently, as did Don Mackholtz, and I think some of the Japanese have made visual discoveries recently. It could just be serendipitous. The comet has had an outburst, and simply who happens to image the comet first will discover it. Looking at low elongations in the twilight, most of the surveys, even if they can get low into the twilight in the west in the evening or east in the morning, even if they can get down that far, they can't cover much sky because the rotation of the Earth either has its setting or the sun rising to limit how much you can cover. So certainly the low elongations is a good place to look. You can look at the SWAN or SOHO images, discover comets on their images. They don't get your name; they get named after the instrument on the SOHO spacecraft. But you can still have the pleasure of being the first person to find them. But basically, know your equipment, know what you're looking for, and then target regions of the sky where the surveys are less likely to find them, which typically is low elongations in the evening and morning.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to tell you, Kevin and Rob and Will, I have a big smile on my face. You know why? I don't think I'd ever been told that information like that, the way that Kevin asked the question and the way you answered the question. I know when I'm using robotic telescopes that there are limits to how low the telescopes will go, from limitations of the observatory walls or to limit pointing in the wrong direction robotically. Rob was explaining to us in that answer that if you're a new asteroid or comet hunter, you would want to go out at twilight or sunset or right before sunrise and look somewhere near the horizon, because those would be the areas that are most prolific with these objects. And I didn't know that, fellas. And that's good. That's okay, because I'm still learning and I'm open about that. But now I have some new information, because you know why? Our telescope is up on I think it sits up about 12 feet high, and it can go right down to the horizon, and it has no limitations. So when I'm doing a survey, I can start doing that at those hours, and that information helped me out greatly, Rob. So thank you very much. And Kevin, thank you for the question. And Kevin can't say you're welcome because his microphone's not working, but he's hearing us. So let's see. We're gonna be pushing the envelope for the edge of the end of the show. Will, can you hear me? Will?
Oh, you still got me?
Yes, sir. I still have you. Can you hear me?
I got you.
Okay, we're going to be getting toward the end of the show. I think you have another question, but I'm going to let you have a recap and I want you to stay here, but I want to give everybody a chance to thank everybody for getting together and have this conversation. So you're up.
Yeah, well, Rob, it's been an absolute honor and a pleasure to talk to you today, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. I'm eventually going to become a comet hunter as soon as I can gather the funds and stuff like that. And I just wanted to tell you that you're doing great work. Obviously, the effects are being shown there with your multiple hundreds of discoveries. And I guess maybe my last question would be: do you have any advice for someone like myself who has no equipment and is looking in that realm?
Anyone that doesn't have any equipment still has access to equipment through the internet. I mean, I'm sitting here in the iTelescope network head office, i.e. Pete's house, and anyone that has an internet connection can use internet telescopes. There's also, as I mentioned earlier, there's the SOHO and SWAN imagers, the stereo spacecraft. They're actually imaging the sun's environment, but comets are, particularly sun-grazing comets, are falling into that region, and it's mostly amateurs that are first noticing them. So yeah, there's plenty of opportunities on the internet for anyone that doesn't have any equipment.
Well, let me add this for the listeners as well. Will, you are president of an astronomy club, correct?
Sir.
What's the name of it?
The Astronomical Society of Southeast Texas. And
you have a lot of people in your club and group just like you, right?
Oh, yeah. Guys that are, obviously huge astronomy buffs. They're a lot older than I am. I've had a lot more time to sort of hone their skills. But yeah, there's quite a few of really astronomers. So
let me take this a step further, and I'm going to get to the point. And we have our Cosmic Obsession Observatory also. Will asked a question about no equipment. I beg to differ that everyone has the resources, whether it be on the internet through iTelescopes.net network that everybody can use, or if you want to find in your locale, if you're not in such a rural area, you can find groups like Will's or people like me through the internet. Go to the internet and find somebody who's doing astronomy. Find someone near you and reach out, because the end to the story is, if you as an amateur go to another amateur or a professional, just like I'm going to Mr. McNaught for his help, we are helping everyone who comes. You probably get brought into a close-knit group of people who enjoy looking at the stars, who enjoy doing research with the things outside our atmosphere, who have the equipment, who will openly invite you in to share it with them. If you're not comfortable with that, then you can even go to an astronomy club like Will's, and they have ways for you to get involved, and you can interact with their equipment, and you can, for a much less of an investment, but you get so much more out of it. I mean, you can almost, at that level, at that amateur interconnection, connecting with an astronomy club level, whatever you do have to invest in that experience is so well worth it that I think with the internet and the way the amateurs are interacting with others these days, and they probably always have, I just speak of myself in general, that you have a way to reach out and see the stars for sure. Never feel like you need a lot of equipment to do it. Once you start doing it, you'll find reasons to go and buy some equipment, and that's okay, because that's the natural progression. But for those who need to start, there are ways for you to start with, by meeting people, becoming friends, and looking through their equipment, and that's the best way to do it. If there's advice when you're going to buy a telescope, is to go out and do an astronomy club star party and look through other people's telescopes to get a feel of what they're interacting with.
Actually, could I quickly just mention a couple of points there?
Yes.
Regarding star parties, Thomas Bopp did not have a telescope when he made his contribution to the Comet Hale-Bopp discovery. He was using a friend's telescope out in the Arizona desert, and he simply knew the sky well enough that when he looked at an object, he saw this fuzzy blob nearby and knew it was a comet. Equally, Steve Lee is a professional night assistant here at Siding Spring with the 4-meter Anglo-Australian telescope. He was at a star party. He was going to give a talk about a planetary nebula. The work had been done professionally at the observatory. And he said to people, if you want to see the planetary nebula that I'll be talking about tomorrow, line up here and I'll show you it. And he star-hopped to the planetary nebula, and on the way he ran over a comet. And he'd done it so often, he knew immediately that it was not supposed to be there. So, star parties can be good places to go along to find comets.
Kevin was saying, again, Kevin's left without a microphone, but I'll speak for him. Kevin Bloodworth said that he's with the Middle Georgia Astronomical Society. So if you're in the area where Kevin is, and you know of the Middle Georgia Astronomical Society, contact Kevin Bloodworth, and he'll bring you and let you see through his telescopes. I'm sure he'll help you in any way. And then he was saying exactly to the discovery of Mr. Bopp, and he said through a 16-inch Dob, and see, that's, our Dobsonian for Cosmic Obsession Observatory's got 25 inches. So whenever we might have something going on, try to contact me, and you can come in and look through our Dobsonian or see the video feed from our Celestron in person, or wait till when we do our live broadcast, because we broadcast the live telescope feeds on the Night Skies Network. It's hard to run a regular schedule when you're having to wait for weather to clear, and this happens to be a particular time where we haven't been doing a lot of broadcasts. But definitely as new amateur astronomers, and in fact, let me do a couple of things. I want to say hello to Justin Iwiniak and his daughter India. Dad just bought his daughter her first telescope, and I know that she might be, and he might be listening tonight. So, go out there, India, spend as much time as you need to go out into the night skies, enjoy your new telescope. Kevin, I want to thank you for sure for coming, and because he had to sign up for Skype just to come into the discussion. I'm sorry that your microphone didn't work, but we're going to get you in the next time with that microphone working, because I know that you're probably biting your lip wanting to be heard, but hopefully I gave you some voice. Mr. Will Young, how you doing, Will?
Good. Thank you, Francis, for the opportunity, my man. It's been a pleasure, an honor, and thank you, Mr. McNaught, for coming on for us and giving us lowly amateurs some good meat to chew on.
Yes, just thank you very much, Rob, for making yourself available. I've been fortunate enough to meet such great people who have made themselves readily available, and I have great friends who have made the connections to bring people together to me. So thanks to Pipolos, thanks to the iTelescope.net network of people. The group of people over there is fabulous. Mr. Rob McNaught, this is the first time you and me had a chance to speak. I hope that I could come back and ask you to talk to me again. Hopefully it was an enjoyable couple of hours.
Sure, I've enjoyed it, and I should add, I'm also a lowly amateur astronomer. I've just had great luck. I've had fantastic luck in getting jobs that have given me these opportunities, and
there's nothing. Luck is good. I feel I'm a very lucky fellow as well, and it's there's a whole bunch of research that goes into luck, and sometimes each person, it takes a person to accept the luck and make it work for him, because I know lucky people who turn out not being lucky. So let me see. I wanted to say one more thing. I wanted to say that The Crow sponsored this show because the radio station, freedomslips.com, Revolution Radio, it's a listener-supported radio station. They give me voice 5 times a week, 6 times a week on 6 different shows. So to The Crow and the listeners, go to the Market Watch with Crow every morning, Monday to Friday. And Mr. Crow, thank you very much for sponsoring this show. I think that's going to be it. I think that will be it. And Rob, what time is it in Australia right now? It's Friday, what?
Oh, I don't know. Must be getting on for midday, 11 o'clock.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It is about 11. I didn't realize that we got together a couple of hours earlier than we expected. I feel like it's a little bit later than it's supposed to be. But in fact, no, it's 7:11 p.m. here in Central Daylight Time in Texas. That's 16 hours ahead, puts you somewhere at about 11:11 a.m. Friday morning in Siding Spring, Australia. So we'll end it here. Rob, thank you very, very much for sharing your information. I hope it wasn't too boring or bad. And I know
enjoyed it.
Yeah, the listeners, because you can listen to the show tomorrow night, because this is a recorded program that'll be played live tomorrow night, or for you, it's going to be 11 a.m. Friday. So in 24 hours, this interview will go live, and you can hear it on freedomslips.com. And then tell Pete I said thank you very much, and you have a wonderful afternoon, because your day is pretty much just starting.
Yeah, I've got a recorded soccer game to go and watch now.
Well, what team is going to win?
I've forgotten who it is. It's Sporting Lisbon and Manchester City, and it's in the balance.
Okay. Oh, it's in the balance. Oh, good, good. Okay, my friend, I'm going to let you go, and I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Will Young, Kevin Bloodworth, you all have a great morning, a great evening. Come back tomorrow on freedomslips.com and listen to this show yourself and see what we talked about. But for now, I'll see you later.
See you, Princess.